All right, kiddos, we are going to talk about the 7 principles of the Constitution. These are 7 ideas or beliefs. A lot of times they're called building blocks, and these are woven throughout our government and throughout our Constitution. They are not necessarily explicitly mentioned by name in the Constitution, but the way the Constitution was set up aligns with these 7 principles. So the first one we're going to talk about is popular sovereignty. That's a fancy word. In dealing with government and politics, if you see the word popular, that refers to the people, okay, the populace. So think of this word as people, and then sovereignty means power, okay? If a nation is a sovereign nation, that means they're their own, they're under their own powers. So popular sovereignty literally translates to people power, okay? And the idea of our government and our U.S. Constitution is that it is essentially gets its power from the people. We elect our leaders to make decisions for us. We vote on election days and make decisions on certain issues that involve our society. And so Americans share in the power to govern themselves. And this was evident, if you remember back to the preamble, the very first 3 words are "we the people." And so people power, popular sovereignty. People voting on election days. Right along with popular sovereignty is something called republicanism. And this has nothing to do with Democrats and Republicans, okay? The idea of republicanism is that we, as people, elect leaders to make decisions for us, okay? So I do go vote on some issues, but most issues I don't get to decide on as an individual. I don't make laws. I elect people to make those laws for me. So when I exercise my popular sovereignty or my people power, I really am electing, in many cases, electing officials and representatives who will make most of the decisions for me. So that's the idea of a republic. So if you cover up the last part of this vocabulary term, we live in a republic. And a republic is where the people vote and the people elect leaders, and then those leaders make most of the decisions for them. And if we don't like the decisions they make, then we elect somebody else. Federalism. All right, we've seen this term before. Federalism, or a federal system, is a system where the state governments and the national government share power, but the national government is typically supreme, okay? So we're going to learn later in this unit, we're going to learn about some powers that are delegated only to the federal government. We're going to learn about some powers that are reserved to the states. And then we're going to learn about some powers that are concurrent powers, or they are shared by both the federal government and the state governments. But the idea of federalism is that you divide up the powers of our nation between the states and the federal government. But the federal government will be supreme. Separation of powers. Okay, separation of powers looks at all the powers granted to the federal government. Okay, so remember, in federalism, some things are left to the federal government. So now we look at all those federal government powers, and we give some of them to the executive branch, some of them to the legislative branch, and some of them to the judicial branch. That way, no one branch becomes too powerful. You don't want the president becoming a tyrannical leader. You don't want Congress making unnecessary and unfair laws. You don't want the Supreme Court handing down harsh punishments or interpreting the laws incorrectly. And so you divide or separate the powers of the government. And again, you're trying to prevent tyranny, cruel and unjust government. Checks and balances. This goes along with separation of powers. Each branch has its own powers, but how they utilize those powers needs to be monitored or checked by the other 2 branches. So the Congress and the Supreme Court monitor what the president does. The president and Congress monitors what the Supreme Court does, and Congress and the president monitors what the Supreme Court does. So they all monitor each other. It's like 3 siblings kind of watching out for each other, and if they have to, they got to tattle on the other sibling for doing something wrong to the parents. That's kind of checks and balances. Each branch is watching out for the other, and then if they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, they call them out on it. Limited government. This is also referred to sometimes as the rule of law. And you may have heard that term in the news lately. If you look down at the bottom of this slide, the rule of law means that everybody in the government, including our president, our congressmen, our judges, all the way down to average people like me, 8th grade history teachers, we all have to follow the same rules and laws in our country. So that's called limited government. The idea is you're limiting the power of the leaders, and again, sometimes referred to as the rule of law. Individual rights. Individual rights, this is woven through our Constitution and really in our amendments, the Bill of Rights and our amendment process. This is where certain individual liberties and privileges and freedoms are granted to the people. Remember that the Constitution in its truest sense did not have a Bill of Rights or have any individual liberties or freedoms protected. So that's why we did add the Bill of Rights, and we have since added 17 other amendments to go with those 10 for a total of 27 amendments to protect the people's individual freedoms. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, no cruel and unusual punishment, trial by jury, okay, all those things. And that is the last of the principles of government. So to recap, these are our building blocks, foundations of the Constitution. We've got people power or popular sovereignty, republicanism, the idea that we elect leaders to make decisions for us. Federalism, we divide powers between the national government and the state governments. Separation of powers, we take all of those national government powers and we divide it into 3 branches, legislative, executive, and judicial. Checks and balances, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches all monitor and check each other. Limited government, everyone must follow the same rules and laws, including our president and our other leaders. That's called the rule of law. And then individual rights. The people's specific individual freedoms and privileges are protected within our Bill of Rights and other amendments. Thanks for watching.